What is ESG? Who wants to tell me what ESG is?
Like what the acronym stands for?
Yeah.
Environment, environment,
Mm-hmm.
social, government or governance. I haven't figured out which one it actually is.
Yeah.
Governance.
Yes. Thank you. So it is, as I previewed, environmental, social, and governance. And these are metrics that are being used as a proxy for sustainability. And these metrics tell us how companies are preparing and performing in these areas. And it tells us how they're doing versus their peers, versus their peer group, which can be defined in different ways. It is not an absolute value, it's a relative value. So keep that in your head. I'm going to talk about it later, but this is a number that you don't compare. You're not going to compare Delta with Exxon and say, oh, one or the other has a higher ES or a better ESG score, therefore they are a more sustainable company. It doesn't work that way.
Huh.
Huh, yeah, I know, right? So, first of all, let's talk about the environmental piece. This is really about how a company's products and practices affect the environment. So, I'll give you just a quick taste. Some of the sample issues that are addressed through collecting these metrics would be things like energy management and, as you can read, the environmental impact of their supply chain, of their products, along with their climate change policies, just a few sample issues. And a metric, carbon footprint is a metric we're all pretty familiar with. And a good score, which is actually a low score, it switched about a year and a half ago. It used to be high was good. Now it's low is good. And that's because we're measuring risk and we want risk to be lower. But anyway, I'm going to just say a good score could mean that a company has less exposure to significant risks that come with, say, climate change. So moving on to social, this is really about people, how a company manages relationships with employees, suppliers, their communities. There are a huge range of metrics in this category, and we'll look at them in depth in a second, but product safety and ethics, supply chain, human rights. Are they using forced labor or child labor? Data security and anything around employee health and safety would fall within this the issues that fall within social. Companies' gender diversity, those are metrics that would fall here. And when a company is doing well on their social practices, one of the benefits is that they likely have a better ability to attract and retain top-notch talent, which has an impact on their financial performance, but it can also help with consumer loyalty and premium pricing and avoiding product liability issues.
So, well, I guess we might get into more of each of these, but is it like, do they go into like the things of like the specific tasks that employers are doing to create this kind of social? Like, are they like,
Well, so we're going to look at some more of the metrics in a second.
all right, I'll wait.
In fact, you are going to volunteer them. Um, governance is a little boring. This is how well the company is run, but what kind of rights the shareholders have. How much the how much the CEO earns in relation to the lowest paid worker. So yeah, executive pay is a sample metric, and this should be a low score, means it's well run. It has good risk control. So here is where I have more metrics. And by the way, there are tons of metrics. They differ by industry. And some are going to be more important in certain industries than others. But here's a general collection of some more metrics in E, S, and G. So why don't you guys tell me, what do you think might be some other metrics that a company might want to measure to see whether they're doing well or not so well on the environment?
Water consumption.
Water, good. Water consumption. What else?
Sustainable packaging of their products.
Okay, good.
Waste generated.
Waste, yes. All right, good. That's 3. Let's take a look at how you did. Small on my, so starting up here, green building and smart growth. So you guys, that definitely applies to you, right? Climate change and carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. Clean technology, pollution and toxics. Sustainable natural resources and agriculture. And here's water use and conservation. So, waste, as it would relate to the environment, would fall within the E category. We just haven't explicitly called it out. Sustainable packaging actually falls somewhere else within the S. Yeah. So anyone else want to guess? S, remember, is about relationships with the community, your employees, your supply chain. So can you think of
Customer satisfaction rating?
Customer satisfaction? Good. What else? Think about big social issues we face today.
Equity.
Equity.
Mm-hmm.
Turnover rate.
Yeah.
I guess policies in place for family support and leave.
Yep.
Yeah, benefits, employee benefits.
Yep. So you guys are nailing these things, and you're actually you're going deeper than what we show in this graph here. But here's what the sort of broad categories are: workplace safety, labor relations. So you're talking about employee satisfaction, the benefits. Policies for family support would certainly fall here. Diversity and anti-bias issues, there's equity built into that. Community development, avoidance of tobacco, and human rights.
Can you talk about community development? What's under there?
Yes. So relationship with the community. This is so. Let's say Coke is building a new facility, and they're building it next to a neighborhood, a neighborhood that is full of families that have been there for a long time. And how do they handle? Are they going and trying to scoop up all of those homes for as little as possible? Are they working with the community? That would be one example. Are they giving back to the community? Do they even view themselves as a community, as part of the community? So philanthropy and volunteerism would fall in here. But also just literally, being present and being engaged in, say, a company that's working with you, that would fall within community development. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Does it also get to like creating a sense of community and I guess like uniting people in the community?
Yeah. I mean, these are very high level. So that when I think about some of the like really granular metrics, how many hours of volunteer work did your employees do in 2021?
Mm-hmm.
And were those compensated days? What philanthropic work does the company support with either time or expertise or money? If you're involved in coalitions that are trying to improve the greater community, how many hours, time, et cetera, went to that? So yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
You're probably going to get to this. I might be asking too far in advance, but
That's okay.
Checklist that they go down and like add up points for it, or how does that get tallied?
Oh, that's so at the end of this. But yes, but we're going to look at that when we look at SASB, which is one of the accounting methodologies that incorporates the ESG criteria, those that are material for the business, the ones that actually have a financial impact, and that's a way that they capture those metrics.
Okay.
But how they turn into a score is a different topic. So that we will also cover. So I'm not gonna. We'll stop here. I won't make you guess on the governance side, but this is stuff like political contributions, or as we've heard in some companies, forcing your employees to contribute to a particular political candidate. Executive compensation, how much is that CEO making? Board diversity, this is really important. Corruption, and the level of independence that a board has to run the company.
I don't think I would want to see some of those big corporate companies executives compensation compared to their lowest paid employees. I'm sure a lot of them don't want to look at that.
And they don't. And boy, I mean, in leading companies are starting to tie sustainability performance, particularly around climate issues, to executive performance. And a CEO who is on board with that and understands how important this is, and also understands how these kinds of practices create economic opportunity, not just for the company, but for everyone, and how much it costs if we don't do these things, and who has a sense of fairness and responsibility to the communities around the world in which they operate and which they touch, that's not going to be such a bad thing for them. For other CEOs, they're not going to like it very much. And they can either get with the program, or they can lose out in many ways, which we're going to talk about next, because
Sustainable CEOs really suck.
They do. They suck. I don't know why it keeps jumping ahead. I think something's crazy. So we're going to take a step back from those and just talk, big picture question. Why is ESG performance important? Why do you guys think it's important?
Well,
I guess if you have a low ESG score, meaning you have good practices in place, you're more, I guess, able to continue for the long haul because you have sustainable practices in place. Sustainable, not necessarily meaning environmental, but you have like good practices that are keep you on the right track as, like, I guess the world is moving forward.
Yep. Yep. Great.
I mean, they're making an impact on their employees and their community and in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
in the right way, I guess.
Good.
You're going to make more money.
Make more money? That that's actually a benefit. Tanner, you have any ideas?
I mean, as regular people become more informed, I think this is a good way to kind of get CEOs thinking like everybody else. I know I had a meeting with Charles Schwab last week getting this stuff straightened out, and they were giving me a whole bunch of these, and I'm like, okay, cool. So as I become more informed, CEOs become more informed.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly it. I mean, after all, they're in business to serve. Who are they creating all of their products and services for?
Yes, right?
Us. Yes. And when we start changing our preferences and habits, what do they have to do?
Change for us.
They,
Parent.
yeah. Or as I like to say, innovate or die, people. Every business, every product, every industry, it has a life cycle, just like humans. It's a bell curve. We're born, we grow really quickly, and then that rate of growth, slows, and then it sort of plateaus, and and then there's the backside of the curve. You move over it slowly, and then suddenly you're parachuting toward the end. Sorry, it's true though, and it's true for all businesses and all industries. If you are a laggard and you're on that, you're flat or you're starting on the other side. If you do not reinvent, if you do not, have a product or service that starts over at the growth stage, you're going to start competing on price, and it's a race to the bottom. So here's what I put here, why ESG is important. I mean, clearly we have, a climate emergency here, and, only a few years left to turn things around. We have to take massive action. So, that's one of the reasons we're very familiar that this is important, at least to us as a society and all of us in the work that we do. On the S side, we have really reached a crisis level on systemic racism and racial justice, economic opportunity for all, lots of social problems. But when you look at this and the other things that we are facing, as many of them as a result of climate change, because climate impacts everything: our food, our health, availability of water, prices for our products, climate migration, terrorism, and many others. The stakes are high, and these kinds, what we're facing today is global, and they're interconnected, and they are complex. And basically, we need everyone to take part. Governments alone, we need policy. We need governments agreeing to do what they need to do, and to regulate and force some industries to do these things. We need that. But that's not enough. We need philanthropy. We need charity. We need organizations, NGOs. We need everyone working toward this. But so far, those two alone, I mean, have we really solved that many big global challenges ever? because I'm kind of at a loss. I mean, we developed a polio vaccine. We did develop a vaccine for COVID. But, big problems around the world, they still happen. We also need the private sector. We need companies. And as I said before, companies are in business to serve us. And like when it comes to the climate emergency, 80% of greenhouse emissions are generated for our benefit, for making everything that surrounds us, our computers, our clothes, our homes, cars, our entertainment, growing and producing our food, supporting national defense, building our cities and roads and all of our infrastructure, our beautiful, parks in Buckhead. So business and industry has to be part of that solution.
What's the other 20%?
So that would be
Sort of naturally occurring?
Yeah, yes, and I'm not sure how they categorized that. And I apologize if
No, no problem.
completely slipping my mind. But it's like the 80% is like they're directly serving us. It might actually be like the emissions from landfills, after the fact emissions. Yeah, I'll find out though. All right, so this goes to the why companies should actually care. And there are 3 big reasons that companies should care beyond, what you guys mentioned at the beginning. We all know that we all believe that they should care because, well, they should, and it's important, and it's the way the world is going. But you know what? There are some purely kind of selfish reasons that they should want to do this. And these are the stories that resonate with CEOs or employees and investors who don't really care about this sustainability thing, or they don't, it's just whatever. They think it's a fad, or it's just not at the top of their mind. So good sustainability practices, good performance on those E, S, and G factors can create competitive advantage for a company. And who doesn't want a competitive advantage? It's tough out there, folks, right? So the first one is risk mitigation. Good ESG performance is linked to risk. In fact, when I mentioned, it turned from high number was good and then low number is good, it's because now it is being viewed as what is your unmanaged risk associated with your environmental behaviors and practices versus the threats that you face from the environment. So risk mitigation is a very compelling reason for companies to care about their ESG scores. And here's a very interesting study that looked at the 17 companies in the S&P 500 that went bankrupt during this particular period from 2005 to 2015. And what this time frame is important. And does anyone want to guess why?
The Great Recession?
You betcha. This is what shows us, what were they doing sort of leading up to 2008, and how well did they recover, and how quickly did they recover? So of the 17 companies that went bankrupt in this time period, how many of them do you think had this is just E&S score that was either average or better than average or higher, of 17?
I would say
So
zero.
wait, by better, do you mean a better score or a lower score?
Well, it would be a lower score, better performance.
Low.
So they're at the, leading, they were on the leading side rather than the laggard side.
I would guess zero. So. None of them.
0? Anyone else?
3.
3. Okay, good job, guys. The answer is 2.
Oh, wow.
So did someone go back and look at, like, ENS weren't, like, people weren't actually tracking, or were they actually tracking?
They were. Mm-hmm. Yes. So actually, these metrics, they companies started tracking these back in the early 90s.
Okay.
There are also ways to pull some of these metrics going back even further. But this is data, and a lot of this data, particularly around the S and the G, is already in most corporate financial reports.
It's really sad that it's taken that long.
Well, now it's just being packaged as this one big thing, rather than like these separate things that might affect people in different ways.
Right. Well, and it used to be called corporate social responsibility.
Oh,
So companies would put out a CSR report, and it would have a lot of this information in it. It might not be, it might be more policy oriented than, but there was a lot out there, and 92 or 93% of the world's largest companies are submitting some, if not all, of their data that would be used for these kinds of analyses. So anyways,
sorry, I had another question on that. Is it companies that just public companies that people are investing in, or like any company who's a private company and nobody can invest in them, they would still have interest in doing this, or like?
yes. So ESG those are data points that any company can and should be working on, capturing. There are, but they're not going to get if they're not public, they're not going to actually get that data evaluated and put into a score. That is something only for public companies. So those raw metrics are important. They are something that a company can track over time. There is another way for them to evaluate themselves against their other companies in their industry, and our country as a whole, actually the world as a whole. And I am going to close with that.
Okay.
It's very cool, but yes, some of these benefits are more obvious for publicly traded companies, but these benefits, logically would also apply to smaller companies.
Do you know if GuideStar or any of the ones that rate nonprofits look at it?
I don't know. Well, they do. I think they are starting to look at how the nonprofits' assets are being invested. And assets, those investments, if they're using any sustainability criteria, if they're considered sustainable investments. ESG analysis is part of an overarching category of sustainable investing, which is what we do. ESG is one tool. Other than that, I'm not sure. So moving on to the second benefit, it's better operational performance. Companies that are doing well on ESG metrics experience better operational performance, and so it's pretty safe. Would you guys say that more sustainable companies generate less waste? Yeah.
I hope so.
Hope so.
Oh,
Right, right. Well, so wasting energy or raw materials that are left on the factory floor, that's expensive. That's a waste of money. So they did a study. There was, there've been lots of studies, but here's a study that looked at 181 ways that chemical plants could reduce waste. How many of those 181 do you think saved the company money?
I feel like this is a trick question.
All of them.
so
Oh, who said all of them? Who said all? Was
Yeah.
that Katie or Michelle?
This is Michelle.
Michelle. Anyone else?
I say all of them.
All. Oh, you guys are good. It was probably my reaction to that.
Huh?
Only one did not. So, creating more sustainable operations can improve your is at least in this study, but it would make sense. It eliminates a lot of waste, and it is really good for your operating margins. So those are benefits that any company can enjoy. And then there's this, which is also something that a company of any size can enjoy. Financial outperformance, okay? Greed is good here. As Tanner said, as the world moves this way and as consumers care and demonstrate that how our preferences are changing, companies that are creating products and services that have positive attributes on those environmental and social factors, that can lead to increased sales, even premium pricing, which takes your revenue up. Can also improve your market share and kill off some of your competitors, which is always good. We want to get rid of the laggard competitors, right? That's a good thing. Another cool fact is that more satisfied employees. You guys have mentioned this already. You're already there. You just need a little language to wrap around your ideas. But there is a strong correlation between employee satisfaction and corporate performance. A study from Wharton shows that the stock price of Fortune's best 100 companies to work for outperform their peers financially by 2 to 3% every year. And so, that adds up over time. This chart shows the outperformance of those 100 best companies to work for versus their peers in the Russell 3000 over the period of 10 years. So you can see up here, $1,000 turned into $10,346 when you invested in those 100 best companies to work for, and only $41.61 for the rest. So, it's obvious when your employees are satisfied and engaged, and you're doing things to build that. That's part of the S score. You have lower employee turnover. Employee turnover is extremely expensive. It can cost 4 times their annual salary to replace that person. And in the meantime, there's an opportunity cost of not having someone in a job. And you're losing that, intellectual capital that they've built. So, when you've got a high-performing team with lower turnover, that is an incredibly important competitive advantage. So this just kind of summarizes that ESG data, it's not reported in financial statements. Folks who are picking stocks and trolling all of the Yahoo Finance and looking at companies' financials deciding who they're going to invest in, they don't see ESG data, or they're not looking at it. They're just looking at pure financial data. But ESG metrics have an impact on financial performance. And so we need to be considering them. And so these studies have said, 90% of studies say that good sustainability practices reduce what's called the cost of capital. In English, that's like the interest rate that a company would pay on its loans, and how big those loans could be. And when you can get bigger loans at a lower interest rate, that is what you need to grow more aggressively. And companies that are lagging and are more risky, what's going to happen to their interest rates and the size of the loans they can get?
Interest rate goes up.
Yup. And they're paying those interest expenses every year. They're getting less access to that capital as their competitors are getting more and paying less for it. It starts to become very challenging to grow quickly, especially if you're lagging in areas that are very important for our future. If you can't survive in a low carbon world, then maybe you should quit while you're ahead. But so 88% of good ESG practice tied into greater operational performance, as I said, and stock price 80% impacted by that. And here's a nice little graph showing that ESG leaders outperformed their laggards. So I used the best 20%. This study took companies back from 1993 and said if you invested $10,000 in the best 20% or the worst 20%, how much would your investment be worth? And that's
it. Very
yeah. But notice this. So in 2008, we see this dip, right? But then look at the rate of recovery for the top folks. This goes back to that risk, right?
And they all seem to dip still at the same time. Like you can't control, everything's going to dip at some point, but they're able to grow overall more.
Yeah, and those are systemic risks versus. So this dip was a systemic risk. Mm-hmm. A hurricane decimating your city is a systemic risk, but a company level risk that you can manage. What kind of plans do you have in place to deal with that kind of systemic risk? Well, if you have good plans, you can recover more quickly.
So how do you explain, I guess, in the 2008, the big dip there in the middle, the best ESG scores actually dipped further over, like percentage wise, than the other ones? Why? Do you have any thoughts on why that would be? I mean, it obviously recovered faster and better, but it dipped further.
It did. And that's a little surprising because usually they don't dip. I mean, the rule
everything else looks more,
And it could have been simply that they had grown fat. They're doing well. I actually can't explain that.
Is it the fact that it's like there's more to lose? It like so a percent of the same percent of 50,000. Say we were at 50,000 in 08 or something versus being at like 20,000 or something. So like if you're systemic means everyone has the same like percent. 20% of 50 is going to be greater than 20% of 15.
Yep. That's it. Good job. Thank you, Michelle. When you're done working there, you can come work with us. Just,
Mhm.
just kidding. Here's what happens with that. So because ESG metrics are linked to financial performance, if you're a public company or even if you're a private company, you need to care because investors, their preferences have shifted towards sustainable investments. So in the US at the beginning of last year, this was a $17.1 trillion market. That is one out of every $4 invested in the US. And it's a $34 trillion market globally. It's actually much higher than that, but the data is hard to collect, and the organization that collects it hasn't put anything new out for quite some time. But let me show you this. This is inflows into sustainable mutual funds in the United States. 2015, $2.8 billion, $5 billion, 5.3, 5.5. In 2019, we jumped to 21.4.
And this is people like regular people or whoever investing in sustainable companies.
Correct. In sustainable mutual funds that are comprised of sustainable companies, yes. And it's all kinds of investors, including individual investors. Yes, like the interest level and the percentage of individual investors, families, everyday folks, all of us can buy sustainable mutual funds. You do not have to be, living in a huge home in Buckhead in order to afford to choose a sustainable fund. But look what happened then last year. So we more than doubled it. And then the Q2 numbers are out like any day now, but as of this morning, they still weren't. But just in Q1 alone, we beat 2019. So this gives you a sense of, you're hearing this more frequently because people are talking about sustainability because it's so important, and they're voting with their money.
Like the big, like, did a celebrity come out and say, I'm gonna invest in this because it's important? Like, why was there such a big jump between 2018 and 2019?
So a lot of this has to do with the availability of the market, how many funds you could invest in. And so as this 2015 was really the first year where there were enough types of assets. So, a large cap growth fund, or an international fund, or, a mid cap blend, like all of the different styles of mutual funds. It was 2015 when really there were enough of them so that an average investor could have an entire diversified portfolio, say for their retirement, comprised of sustainable assets. But as the demand, as asset managers are realizing, okay, this is becoming more and more important, they start putting out more and more product, creating more products, and thus, as there's demand driving this and supply at the same time. So those things both help. Everyone's looking in the same direction at the same time.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. It's kind of think about this though. If you're a laggard company and $1 out of $3 in the world is invested sustainably, and you're in the bottom third, say, when it comes to your sustainability performance, like you're being left out of these mutual funds or these university endowments. They're not looking at you if they are investing sustainably. So not only do you have higher interest rates on your smaller loans, but you have less access to capital in the in the markets. And so once again, it's a struggle to, if you need to grow and your margins are becoming thinner and your competitors are getting further ahead of you, these are basic business decisions that have nothing, well, even if you don't care about sustainability, you need to care about this because your business is at stake. And that's what sustainability really means. Is it something sustainable is going to last. It is here today without sacrificing the future. It will last into the future. That's a pretty powerful incentive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I thought this would be a lovely picture to look at. And maybe take take a step back. How are we doing on the things that you guys are wanting to learn?
I'm doing well.
We're doing well?
No, this is a lot of great information. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay, I do just like the cynic in me. Just I get that, obviously I understand that if you have good like safety measures in place, you're obviously going to face less like OSHA violations and stuff
Right.
like that. You're avoiding risk.
Right.
The better you treat your employees, the more they'll stay around. You're not going to have to like keep retraining people, lose time, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have like super cheap labor and you're using like super cheap materials and you can sell your stuff for super cheap, like I just don't get how like those types of companies like are still probably going to do well for in the market of people that don't. I know more and more people care about better social and that kind of stuff issues, but there is a market of people that are like, what's the cheapest thing I can get? And the cheapest prices are made with the cheapest materials that are probably not environmentally state friendly and not good labor practices. So
Right.
I don't know. I just
So think about what we've just talked about. Let's say they're using they're using forced labor, to keep the costs down. And more of the world is saying we're not willing to invest in that because consumers don't want it, because it's human rights violation, because our customers are screaming about this, because we know it's the right thing to do, and it can't be sustained. What does that do to the company that's engaging in those practices?
yeah, I guess they're gonna go
Better
Good
labor
business.
wages, and then they're gonna have to jack up those prices on their products.
Yep. And if they're getting the cheapest, if they're using the cheapest materials to create their products, why are those materials so cheap? Well, they could have been made with, children could have made them who aren't being compensated. But they haven't had to pay the externalities for those materials. And as we realize that there is a cost associated with cheap products, for example, fast fashion. I guess that's probably the answer to your question, is fast fashion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it came out of nowhere and then it died.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for this reason. We can't afford as a society to be, doubling, tripling the amount of apparel we create just so that it can end up in the landfill. And, enjoying it because it's cheap. So, that's over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So in a minute we're gonna explore, because you guys were asking, so what are these ratings, like where do they come from, and can we take a look at Delta and maybe some of the companies that we work with?
Can I ask you a quick question before we?
Uh-huh. Of course.
At a company, who is the person, like the role that is paying the most attention to the ESG score?
It should be the CEO and the CFO. If the CEO doesn't care, CEO needs to go. The board needs to cut that CEO's compensation. But yes, the CEO and the CFO, I have a great slide that has a quote on it that, while all these other, the world was talking about sustainability, and companies weren't paying attention. But when BlackRock and Vanguard show up at their quarterly meetings and start screaming at them that they need to improve in these areas, now they've got their attention. I have a friend from business school who is the CFO of a large regional bank. And he called me in a panic because BlackRock and Vanguard, their two largest investors, said that if you do not start reporting on this, within the next, if you haven't made significant progress within the next year, your enterprise value is going to plummet, and we're probably going to sell you off for peanuts in 3 to 5 years. And so that gets executives' attention. And so now, yeah.
We're talking to either an HR person in a company or, the chief sustainability officer if they have one. So that's part of, I guess, how would you recommend we sort of, all the different programs we offer. So that's sort of the way we would be coming into that conversation. So I guess, how do we use ESG to position our programs with them in a way that they'll see how to translate that up to get the attention of that CFO and CEO?
Yeah, I mean, that is a fantastic question. I feel like it's one that has to kind of be talked through on a case by case basis. Like, I don't want to make any generalizations. I will say that, that HR bubbling this up is not going to cut it. We just know that. Chief sustainability officer, depending on their, if they are part of the executive team and they have the ear of the CEO and the CFO, and the level of influence and expertise that they have, may be able to bring this to their attention. If they are a public company and they don't know these things, then a chief sustainability officer should be able to get their attention with some of these kinds of stories, and this data. But their investors have probably already talked to them about it. So maybe a CSO can, push them and say, okay, we have, if that person knows what their metrics are, if they're doing a good job reporting them already, here are programs that can improve. So
fair to say, since you said, an HR person bringing it up is not going to cut it, would it be fair to say that an HR director might be actually motivated to show how they are part of that conversation, just because they know it's part of the bigger, it might give them more credibility in bringing up some of their needs with the executive team? Is that a fair characterization?
You know what? You're right about that. A lot of not enough HR leaders are either senior enough or don't have the mind. They're not necessarily tying the value of that employee capital, that intellectual capital, to financial performance. They may not have data that shows, the link between employee satisfaction and stock price, as we saw, a few slides ago. With that kind of ammunition, absolutely, I think that it would be a motivator for them to, get in front of their executives and make a case for it. If they have data backing them up and they can tell that story in a compelling way, then yeah.
Interesting way for us to approach it.
Yeah.
Good question, but I've never really thought about the HR person not being a C-suite level. Is that?
There's like a few that I guess like the CHRO chief. Some of them have that title, but that's been very few that we've run into.
I didn't think of that.
I mean, it really depends. In some companies, they may be sitting at the table, but they may not have the influence.
But it certainly speaks to their what should be their social score if they're not at that table.
Correct. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the people who are sitting at that table, they are the people who are, driving and making decisions for the company. And if you don't have a certain function represented, then obviously that function is not quite as important. It's being overseen by someone else. It's always better for information to come from your own mouth than someone else's. All right, so let's talk quickly about where this data comes from, and then let's take a look at some. Let's look at all of our favorite public companies in the Atlanta area, shall we? So ESG, just the data, the raw data comes from lots of places. Company financial reports. Some of this data is in those financial reports now if they're using SASB requirements, or they may be issuing a separate ESG report or a separate sustainability report. Their corporate social responsibility reports might have some of this data in it. They might have it on their website. So those are a few sources. Third-party data also comes into play here. There are a lot of great organizations that are out there collecting, synthesizing all this information about companies and comparing companies. And then, of course, there's stuff that's happening every day. So scandal hits. That's information that's getting fed into analyses. Some of those scandals happen on social media. Bad social media decisions can lead to a more scrutiny by the folks who are creating these ratings.
So is there one overarching company that takes all of these sources and puts the analysis together?
There are over 100 companies that do that, actually. The three largest were Morningstar, Sustainalytics, and MSCI. Morningstar bought Sustainalytics last summer, so that's why I made Sustainalytics smaller. But they're not fully integrated yet. So sometimes you are looking at Sustainalytics data on a Morningstar site, and then you realize, hey, it's the same that I'm getting from Morningstar. So yes, but these are three big ones. And
Question.
It's not going to be on the Morningstar report, like how you can go on Charles Schwab and just pull the Morningstar report on a. Well, that's more of a.
So I am gonna show you what's some of the information that's available to the public. It is very rudimentary because this is very expensive stuff. because what happens is these 100 companies are taking all this raw data. It's just this ESG data, it's just data, you know. Employee turnover is just like one data point. How do you turn that into an S score with these other things? And given the industry that you're in and what is most important in your industry, and how are you categorizing industries? Who are you going to compare this company to? Like, for example, Coke, in Morningstar Sustainalytics, they're in I have to check, but MSCI has them in one category, which is either beverages or soft drinks, and the other one has them in the other one. Well, those are universes of different kinds of companies. And so their score, their rating, it's graded, they're graded on a bell curve. So in one system, they might be considered more or less risky, a better ESG performer than the other. It could be the analysis that was done, or it could be the comparison set. So again, these are just numbers.
I have a question.
Yep.
Do you have to choose to have an ESG score, or do people create them for you without, is Coke like, I want someone to make my ESG score because I think it's going to be good and I want to promote that? Or do people just look at them and make them?
Yeah, they're those companies are in business to take all this raw data that they can find and create, ESG scores and tools that allow big institutional investors and firms like ours to take that data and translate it in a way that determines, how we're going to invest.
So
Okay,
whether
so
they want it or not.
yeah, so Morningstar, they'll give someone an ESG rating. They didn't ask for it. You just going out there and assessing them and judging them based on the data that's available.
Correct. And of course, they're going to start with the largest companies, because those are the companies that have the largest market caps and investors are most interested in. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the universe of publicly traded companies, so I was doing a demo of the Morningstar platform, which would have cost us, if we wanted all the components, it would have been $3 million a year. And yeah, but they gave me 30 days access to it free, because there were ways to, I'm like, I don't need all this stuff. I just need a data feed. And so I'm going through it and I'm looking at it and I'm like, guys, interface. Interface was, they did not have them identified as a company that was creating sustainable products.
Really?
Really? They didn't have them listed as a company that was using renewable energy in their operations. They didn't say that they were spending much R&D on sustainable products. And I'm sitting there with Morningstar. I'm like, do you know who this company is? And they're like, they're a manufacturing firm. And so, they're like, well, they're a little small for us to do, a deep dive, to have, an analyst on them. So I'm like, well, that's no good for me, because, in many cases, we're looking at companies that are, they may be smaller, or they may be, you guys just aren't looking at the right things. And he's like, well, he's like most investment firms use our products because what they really want to do is just take their existing like investment model, and they want to tweak it a bit so that their, say, mutual fund gets a higher ESG score. So they want to dump a few companies and add a few more companies in, and, hey, voila, now I have like an ESG fund. Here you go. Like, and they just made a couple of tiny tweaks to it, whereas, that's not what I'm trying to use it for. We're looking for serious leaders in their categories, and I'm just like, this sucks. I wouldn't pay $3,000 a year for this. Anyway, I digress.
I'm gonna ask a question.
So you kind of answered my question a little bit, because I was going to ask for clarification's sake in my head. So the ESG is almost like a percentile based on the pool that you are put in. And so then that kind of brought me to my second question is, so how often do you see that pool used to manipulate those ESG scores? You know what I mean? Because I know of companies that are horizontally integrated, could be potentially put in very different pools of industry, and so I was wondering how often you might see that, if that exists, if that's going on, or if I'm just overthinking.
Yeah, no, that's
categories.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about the two main ways that you can, there's a NAICS score, and there's oh gosh, what's the other one? There are two major ways of categorizing industries, and they're different. So, accounting practices are different, and reporting practices on all these metrics. There are actually 5 different groups that are coming together to try to standardize these to a much greater degree. This is a process that is always happening when data is involved. Like, how can we standardize it? How can we improve it? How can we make sure that people aren't, toying with the numbers and misleading people? So that's always part of the story in business. But this data is not. I'm getting to. It can't exist in a vacuum. You can't say, this is a good company, this is a good sustainable company because they have a good ESG score, and this is not. It is not, and there are a few reasons why. And actually, I'm gonna jump ahead and show you.
Yeah, the first company that kind of came to mind was like Johnson & Johnson, because they make cereals and baby wipes and vaccines now. And so it's like, okay, are they going with General Mills, or are they going with Pfizer, and
This slide doesn't want to stay. It's like it just keeps sliding back and forth.
Weird.
My Monty Python, well, yeah, it's like, and now it's going back. Where's it going to end up? Well, I'll leave it right here, since that's where it wants to go. If you couldn't tell, that was a picture from Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
I'm not dead.
That's right. So ESG is not the end all be all. It is one way to evaluate a company's practices. Are these good practices? The score might not be a perfect categorization of whether those practices are leading, to are they the leaders? Are they in the 80th percentile? Are they in the 70th percentile? I mean, obviously, different systems aren't going to put one company at the far end, of the scale. But this is actually just ESG is meant to evaluate a company and the ESG data from a financial perspective, because investors are trying to generate market rate returns. So they're treating ESG, as that look under the hood to get a better sense of how stable this company is, the risks, the financial risks associated with what it's doing. They don't care what the company does. So in, oil and gas, I mean, all of them, right, if you compared them against the universe of all companies, they are going to be, of course, the worst of the worst. But when they're put in their own category, half of them are going to be above average and could be included in a sustainable mutual fund. Yeah. So, and you wouldn't know that because a mutual fund, you don't know what's in that mutual fund. If you invest in an S&P 500 index fund, right now, those companies and their plans will take us to a +3 to +4 degree world. So we're not, we are not fans of investing in the S&P 500. Anyway, I digress. ESG is one component, but the things that we look for are also on this socially responsible side and also the impact side. So, when you're talking to a company, Interface wants to make a difference. Their employees want to fight climate change. They want to reverse climate change. They're doing this because Ray Anderson realized the impact that the company was having on the planet. For their $800 million in revenue, the amount of damage they were doing. And that, the practice of industry was unsustainable. And he took that company on a mission because he believed in it. Whether or not it was going to, how it was going to affect their financial performance, they didn't know. But it certainly has been a boon for them. And it's been a boon for the companies that they trained along the way. Their salespeople saying, why are we telling our competitors about our practices? Well, Interface is already so far ahead of everyone else that, it was in their DNA to bring the rest of their industry along. And so when it comes to investing, this is an investing related graph here, or chart, picture. People who care about issues. So I care, I spent all my free time, on this business and fighting climate change. And if I don't want fossil fuels in my portfolio, I just don't want them there. You could say that is a socially responsible decision. It's based on my values. I don't want them there. I don't care what the ramification is. I don't want them in there. Sin stocks. Back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of religious organizations divested of, tobacco and firearms and alcohol. Those are values. And so, and companies have values. They have missions and values. And those are very important. ESG integration is values neutral. Doesn't care what the company does, just how they fall in their practices versus their competitors, which is
So
still
like you're not going to get points because you're a company that solely offsets carbon. Like you don't get points for that. You get
Correct.
points for how you're governed and
Yep.
if your employees do volunteer work. And
Yep. Yeah. Yep. So the kind of impact that you're making, that's not your business model, that's not in there. So we're getting close to the end here. I just wanted to show you some of these, just some of the places you can go to see these scores. Do you want to see a couple scores?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going here, and then I'm going to share we're going to do it live on Chrome. Okay, good. And let's do this. So I started off here with Coke. And this is on Morningstar. So on Morningstar's homepage, oops, sorry about that. Yeah, so you can search quotes here. Actually, let's just switch this over to Delta. You want Delta? Delta Airlines.
I love Delta.
Okay, so here we have Delta Airlines. And we've got all of this analysis, stock analysis, news, sustainability. They added this, by the way, when they bought Sustainalytics. So here is their
Moderate.
This is all you get. Okay, this is all they're willing to make public, unless you want to subscribe to a really expensive service that I don't even think is worth it. But so they use this 5 globe score, 5 being the best for the planet, and 1 being the worst.
Wait, wouldn't 1 be the best because you have a low risk?
Well, so this globe thing is a Morningstar piece. It's different. It's like 5 globes means you're better, but the score, see, here's the risk rating. So they're not really calling it an ESG score. They're calling it your ESG risk rating. So if you're down here, you have negligible risk. So that's good. Green is good.
Yeah.
And then as you're moving up here, so Delta is right here, pretty much in the middle. They're considered medium.
Of the airlines only.
Let's see how they've categorized them. Do they tell us?
Sub-industry, airlines.
Where do you see that?
Below, you can't see where I'm pointing.
Right.
Yeah, sustainability sub-industry airlines.
Yep. Controversies. Remember when I said, something happens in the world and, controversies have an impact. They have a moderate controversy level. And here are their top 3 material ESG issues. So these are the most important ESG factors that affect their financial performance.
They're the only airline that owns oil refineries.
So does carbon then get to the point that they're airlines and so they have a lot of carbon emissions?
Yeah.
So in that they are heavy carbon footprint, but it's just that we're comparing them to other airlines' carbon footprint.
Well, and something else about Delta is that my dad works for them, so I have a little bit of insight, but they're the only airlines that own their own oil refineries. So when you compare that to other airlines who purchase oil from somewhere else, it's kind of like, okay, now they're responsible for a whole. That's why I was asking about how these industries are categorized, because you could potentially compare what Delta's doing oil wise to I don't know an oil company, but
Yeah. Well,
Let's take a look at Southwest.
maybe they don't. Well, that's a product line of their own if they own it.
yeah.
Oh,
wow.
no. Yeah.
Neighbors.
So, they've got carbon here.
It might be 3 things: the product, governance, carbon, and human capital. These are the things that are most affecting, their biggest issues, or what is that refer?
Yeah. So material issues, and I actually have this resource that I'm going to show you, but
Okay.
these are the things that are going to impact their financial performance the most.
Okay.
Because remember, ESG ultimately is about looking at the risk, at the financial risk.
Right.
You know, so what an ESG investor is going to care about, and thus, you know, a CEO and a CFO of a company that is being, told they need to jack up their ESG performance, they're gonna focus on their material issues first.
Can you look up Simon Property Group?
I certainly can.
Yeah, what's another big company we have that would be worried about that?
Simon Brothers, cousins.
Energy.
Curious about Microsoft too, since they're doing that stuff on the west side.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And guys, I know that we have hit our limit. Do you have a hard stop? You want to spend a few more minutes, or a couple of other things I wanted to show you? But
Yeah, I have a few more minutes. I don't know about Nick, but yeah. I'm good.
and we're waiting. Well, okay.
Oh,
See this? We like to see this.
that's really surprising to me.
Uh-huh. I'm shocked by that. I'm
Okay. Well, so they are put in the category. They're considered a,
okay.
yeah.
Retail?
No. Real estate investment trust.
Oh,
Yes. So these are. Oh, Tanner. It sounds like you would like to give us the definition of a REIT.
No, I was just having a face at that sub industry, and I was just
Laughing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a REIT is it's considered a fixed income product. It is a fund that buys up properties and then divvies them up into shares like a mutual fund would do, and is then just paying out dividends to their shareholders. The REIT is not actually running the REIT itself. Is an entity that isn't really doing a whole lot other than managing those investments. So when you're managing the investments, you're probably not going to have a large carbon footprint because you're a service business.
So I have a perception that may be totally wrong, and I'm curious on it. I kind of think of REITs as the rich white dude's way of hiding his real estate money and sheltering it. Is that like totally in left field wrong?
Yeah. Yes.
Good.
It might not be totally in left field wrong, but Gary could answer that question better than I can. I wanted to show you. Let's look up. So here's Yahoo Finance. If you have a Yahoo Finance premium membership for $39 a month, you can see a little bit more data, and it's also provided by Sustainalytics. So let's look at. I'm gonna pull up Coke here. Okay, so you can see what we see here. We see that they have a ESG score or a risk rating of 25.25. It's medium. Now we're going to go to Yahoo Finance. Here they are, 25, medium. By the way, this is provided by Sustainalytics that Morningstar owns. So the data is going to be this, it's coming from the same source, but they're showing us different information. So their environmental risk score is a 9.1. We saw it over here. We only saw the total. We didn't see how it broke out. So a 9.1 on the environment would put them, right here. Social is higher. Social, what was it? A 10 point, they're here. And then governance, they're at a 5, which is, and then they've got a controversy level. Those things all add up to 25, which puts them in the 40, at the low end of the medium range. So this is a way to get a little bit more. And by the way, this is where Coke is on their controversies, which, big bad things that happen that affect their ESG performance potentially. And then here's where the category is. You can also look at MSCI. And
We have to have an account and most of them you have to have some kind of subscription to get this information.
No, so this Morningstar, this is public.
Okay.
You guys can get it on Yahoo Finance. You have to have a premium subscription, and MSCI you can get this. This is free as well. Okay. And on MSCI you can also look up mutual funds. But so I looked up the Coke, and here so this data is coming from MSCI, which was the third company on that list. And they use a different methodology. So they put them in the beverages industry rather than the soft drink industry. So beverages is a larger industry. And Coke is rated as they use this AA, which, in this case, an A is good, and a AA and a AAA are the best.
Like a bond rating?
What's that?
Why are they?
Yep, like a bond rating. And, so they're putting them in the leader category, whereas we saw that they were in the, average to medium with Morningstar and Sustainalytics. Then they give us this info. They said they're a leader in packaging material and waste, which is, do any of us agree with that?
They're like the number one plastic producer in the world.
Right. Right.
We try.
But potentially on a per unit basis or as a percentage of revenue or whatever MSCI is using to massage that data versus what Sustainalytics is using has come up with a different rating for them.
Which one do you like better generally?
We use Sustainalytics. What's fun about MSCI though is they break this out. So,
yeah, I wish the other one did that.
Yeah, and it's better to look at Southwest versus Delta versus your other airlines, in the same platform to see how they compare. But again, it's not really telling you the whole story. This is just kind of for your own, information. This is certainly not enough to make an investment decision because you need to decide whether it's a good investment in the first place. But the professionals get access to reams and reams of data, all the stuff that's behind this. So if you guys have $3 million and want to,
yeah, just right here.
Yeah. So
the list of all of the different kind of rating, things that come into the rating, like
Yep.
you compare the
Yep.
things we do with where they would score points.
So this is why I'm on the SASB website. So SASB is one of the accounting boards, those 5 groups that I mentioned, that are trying to standardize and build all this ESG reporting into your standard financial reporting so that it comes out and it's consistent across all companies, and there isn't this room for interpretation as there is today. By the way, the fact that these numbers vary doesn't mean that they're not reliable, that they're not valuable. It's just that, by itself, it's just a number. It's what you do with it, how you're using it as a decision-making tool that really matters. This is a fantastic website with all sorts of great research and, how SASB ties to other ESG frameworks. What we want to look at, though, is industry materiality. And since we are, materiality map. Oh. Okay, so this is kind of crazy. But this materiality map is kind of fun. I need to zoom out of this. Hang on. I'm zoomed in so far. Zoom, 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 zoom.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Now it's like really tiny. So this is a way to find out what general ESG category is going to be important for a company in different industry. So why don't you guys pick one of these industries, someone that you're working with? How about infrastructure?
Sure.
Yep, okay. So we click and we expand. We see electric utilities and power generators, engineering and construction services.
Yeah, let's look at that one.
Yep, thought you might. Okay, so let's go down here. So under the environment, ecological impacts, that metric is considered material. It's considered a metric, a practice that will impact their financial performance. So they're all important for us when we care about sustainability, but in ESG, if you want to improve your ESG performance, you're going after the ones that are most material first. And here, that's what this is.
So for an engineering or construction company, in the environmental section, they would focus on improving their ecological impacts.
Yes, that would be a priority. If they're already fantastic in that way, then you can focus on these other ones. But
this is just like, this is what's typical. Like typically in engineering and construction services are going to have the worst ecological impacts in the infrastructure category.
Yes.
Okay.
And by the way, what to get really picky about it, the colors here. Issue is likely to be material for more than 50% of the industries in the sector. So, break this out into sub-industries and it might look different, but we're working, I'm showing you what we've got here. And they break this out a little bit different. Social capital, they've got product quality and safety. Well, that makes a lot of sense, right? More so than data security, not material to their business, not part of their business probably at all. Consumer privacy, same kind of thing. Over here, employee health and safety, product design and life cycle management, and business ethics. Those kind of feel right for that kind of firm?
This is exactly what we need to use. Yep.
The next thing you can do is you can click on it and then you can see the exact accounting metrics that if they're using the SASB system, what are the actual data points? So in this case, the number of incidents of noncompliance with environmental permits, standards, and regulations. That's one of them.
If we were to use, so we do procurement for federal programs.
Uh-huh.
It's going to be, like we're procuring services to do our housing study. If we were to put in a requirement on that their ESG score is above a certain level, lower than a certain level, would that be appropriate, or would that be unfairly discriminating somehow? Because we also have like DDE and BE requirements that are specifically spelled out.
Well, yeah. So there, I don't think that's a great. I mean, you're on the right track, but using an ESG score, again, if they're a smaller publicly traded company like Interface, their score may not reflect reality because they were just too small for the analyst to pay attention to them. So that there's that. And if they're a private company, they don't have an ESG score. I mean, they have certain metrics. But you could put in place the types of policies that we would expect to see from a company that is, leading in a particular area. So, what are their commitments on greenhouse gas emissions or air quality or energy management? What are they actively doing right now? What have they pledged to do, and are they actually in a position to hit that pledge, or are they, is that a pie in the sky type of notion? I want to leave you with this. So I told you there was another tool, and that is, you guys, have you seen this B Corp logo? Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with this program?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is a fantastic program. And in fact, when I hang up with you, I'm going to a B Corp beer and mixing and panel discussion. So
cool.
It will be fun to have a beer with other B Corps. But this is a program that any company can go through. So you can be a public company and go through it. You might have a hard time getting certified, but this is an actual bona fide across the board measurement tool based on your industry, based on your answers to specific questions. It takes 3 hours to go through the assessment. You've got to have reams of data. It asks for a lot, and you need to score an 80 out of 200 points in order to get this B certification that's good for 2 years, and then you have to recertify. But they are looking at there are far more metrics in the B certification platform than there are in the ESG standards. But they're all linked to ESG. So, and as I said, any size company can do this. And that B Corp logo is getting more and more powerful with every month as people learn about these companies and the commitments that they've made and what they're doing right now. Your business model matters here. It didn't in ESG. It does here. Investors also look at the B certification process does spit out a number that gets translated, whatever, for investors. So this is a holy grail that, say, ESG isn't.
So is it safe to say that's sort of the next step?
I don't think it's the next step. And I'm going to stop my sharing. If you don't mind, stop sharing. I'll just come back with you.
Do they
Hi.
like confirm? I've been on like, I've flipped through some of the B Corp stuff before, like, and I know you submit your own stuff, but like, is someone confirming? Because you could just,
Oh, yeah.
okay, okay.
And they
'Cause you
do
could just
random.
say like, I do these things.
They will literally call you up, Michelle, and they will say, okay, show me your report about, the diversity of your workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Get it? Go get it right now. We're waiting. Right.
Here.
Show me, show me your recite. Let's walk around. Let's see if you have, labels on the, on the door, the bathroom doors about paper towel usage. Do you have, do you have meters on your electric sockets? How are you measuring your energy use? I mean, these are things that like we would be subject to, as well. When we founded our company, so we're a legal public benefit corporation, which is actually what the B certification was created to do, was to encourage more states to create this legal entity.
Mm-hmm.
So and Georgia didn't have one. We went to Delaware, and we're a Delaware public benefit corporation. But getting B certified is something that we do in addition to that, because it shows, it proves that we walk the talk. It's a very big burden for a small company to do, and you have to have a year's worth of operating data, and then you got to have the resources to say, yeah, okay, I can pull that right up for you. How many hours of volunteer work did we do last year?
So it's a lot of the same metrics of ESG.
Yes. Very, and more of them. And it's much more accessible. Like, you can go on that website and you can start an assessment and see, and pick your industry, because it differs by industry, and then see what they're asking in different places. And then you can export the whole thing to Excel and, look at all 352 questions. And that is a way that you could really help companies.